Welcome to the new season of the Live Your Spa Life show. The Spa in Spa Life stands for Seek Power Always, that divine power within you to do what you're here to do. The theme for this season is Freedom Fighter. Amazing people like you share ways to ensure your freedom physically, financially, spiritually, and in your relationships to create a world-class life. In these times of uncertainty, it's time for you to move past the distractions and start trusting yourself more through your God-given knowingness. No one truly knows better what's best for you than you. In this season, you'll have plenty of examples of people choosing their best life and giving a voice of freedom to those who are also looking to have their best life. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us and being part of the Live Your Spa Life conversation. With us today is Paul Moore, the founder and managing partner of Wellings Capital. After graduating with an engineering degree and then an MBA from Ohio State, Paul entered management development track at Ford Motor Company in Detroit. After 5 years, he departed to start a staffing company with a partner. They scaled and sold the company to a publicly traded firm 5 years later. After a brief retirement, which I want to hear about, in his early 30s, Paul began investing in real estate in 2000 to protect and grow his own wealth. He completed over 85 real estate investments and exits, appeared on HGTV's House Hunters, rehabbed and managed dozens of rental properties, and developed a subdivision. After completing 3 successful real estate developments, including assisting with the development of a Hyatt hotel and a very successful multi-family project, Paul narrowed his focus on commercial real estate in 2011. Paul is married with 4 children and lives in Central Virginia. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Diane. It's great to be here.
You know, it's funny when, first of all, great having you here, but it's so funny when I hear such an array of a life experience and so many different experiences having, it almost feels like each one of those is a life in and of itself. Does it feel like you reinvent yourself often?
Not anymore. But I have so many different business cards in my desk and I can't even find all of them. But at one point I wanted to put serial entrepreneur on my business card. And I was actually proud of that, but I'm not now because I really think, Diane, as I've gotten older, I've realized that I've met a few billionaires. And the most successful people are people who decided at a very young age what they wanted to do. They put laser focus on that. They said no to 10,000 distractions and they stayed on that course. And so I think that that's probably a better path. If somebody's young and listening right now, that's what I would do rather than jump around like I did, because as a serial entrepreneur for at least a couple decades, I didn't get a really, really deep knowledge of any one thing, and therefore I didn't reach my potential in those things. And so probably not the answer you expected, but that's my story.
Well, I think that's one of those yes and, right? Because I think that, your experience in all those different areas also led you to be successful in those areas. And where some people go wide, others do go deep, right? And they stay in one area and that's what they know. But in a lot of ways, that's all they know, right?
Yeah.
So, you can look at it in many different ways. And I think too, one of the things I admire about what you did about jumping is a lot of people don't jump at all because of the fear that they have in making those changes and making some of those shifts. So I would love for you to share a little bit about how your faith supports you in moving through fear.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that every bad decision we make in our life, every negative emotion, it is said, comes from fear. And once I realized, my dad had this crude saying when I was a kid. He said, someday, I'm not even going to tell it on here. I shouldn't have even started it.
Oh, but you can't even start that. Go ahead. Do it. People will be like, what? I'm going to get 1 million calls with.
Oh, no, I really am going to be so sorry I shared this. But my dad said, he said, when I'd be all worried and upset about a school thing or a football thing, I played football for 12 years. He would go, son, someday someone's going to be peeing on your grave and saying, I wonder who this guy was. And he's like, 100, oh, you said 100 years from now.
Ah,
And he's like, so don't worry about it. And I've really realized the older I've gotten, like I got blasted for an article I wrote about a month ago on an online forum. And it was a huge online forum, not just some small one. And I got blasted. You know what? I took a deep breath and I closed my eyes when I found out about this. And I told my business partner, I said, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You watch. And within a week, we found out it actually was totally okay. And a bunch of people came to my defense, and it was okay. And so I've realized, that my faith has allowed me to trust God and to say, look, he's not threatened at all. He's not threatened by anything. I mean, the one who made the universe, the stars, and everything else, he's not threatened by anything. And if I'm fully aligned with him, then I don't have to be either. Does that make sense?
it absolutely does. And I totally agree with your dad, where it's like, you know what, sometimes we take ourselves so seriously and we're so worried about what somebody else thinks that it either can stop us or we feel like we're never going to get past it. I remember, especially working undercover prostitution, and as you can imagine, the judgment and thoughts and things that went on, and, my parents and just all of the things that people had to say in and around that. But when you know what your bigger purpose is and you know what you stand for, and especially when you have, that God's got your back, no matter what happens, that it doesn't matter what the peanut gallery has to say,
Right.
that ultimately you're here to make your mark.
Yeah, it's so true. And the movie we talked about offline a minute ago, Nefarious, if you watch that 90 minutes, the first 2/3 of it, you're kind of, if you're not careful, if you're like me 7 years ago when I first saw it, you're kind of having a little bit of judgment toward this prostitute who's talking a lot in it. They're interviewing her, and then find out later, oh, wait, she's not at all. She's rescuing people from prostitution. And, I don't know how that's relevant here, but I mean, it is so easy. I mean, I think the fruit of the fall, and I'm talking about the original sin, the original fall in the Garden of Eden, is judgment and grievance. And if we can get away from, if we can take the log out of our own eye and stop judging it and being grieved and being angry at other people, I mean, it takes away a lot of the fear as well, in response to your earlier question,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and just to catch our listeners up to speed, we were talking about, we're both passionate about making an impact with human trafficking and really helping rescue the children and women and men as well who are involved in that world and sometimes don't see a way out. So how is it that you became passionate about human trafficking, and, how is it that you got behind it, and where are you in support of it today?
Yeah. So I watched a movie called Nefarious, put out by Exodus Cry, about a decade ago. And I actually saw it 7 years ago. And I was so stunned. And I did my own little calculation. If you took the record profits, not the average, the record profits of Apple, General Motors, Nike, and Starbucks, added those all together, double that number, you'd have the approximate annual profits generated by human trafficking, according to the U.S. State Department annual report. Well, I'd like to believe, Diane, that if I was alive in the 1800s, that I would have been an abolitionist fighting for freedom for slaves, or if I would have been an adult in the 1960s, that I would have been fighting for just civil rights. Well, this is a civil right. It is slavery, and it's happening right under our nose. In fact, there are more slaves right now than any time in human history. And since we started talking just about 15 minutes ago, 150 people have been captured or sold into slavery worldwide. This is a scourge on our times, and we need to do something about it. And so, in a small way, I'm trying to, promote the end, or promote fighting this great evil and rescuing its many victims.
Well, thank you so much for your work and awareness in this, because one of the biggest issues is bringing awareness to it. And I think that, again, people want to be like, oh, it's not in my backyard, or it's not as big, it happens in other countries. There is a lot of misnomers around that, if there wasn't the supply out there the demand, this goes hand in hand just in business in general. And you think that this is an actual business, that people are making more money than they are in gangs and drugs and any kind of like you've talked about, big corporations, that how big of an impact this is. And it's really interesting that how do you see that something that is such a big moneymaker, that is such an impact in that way, how it almost seems to be the best kept secret?
I wonder. I mean, it's done under such a cloak of darkness, and it's done. Of course, it's happening in the U.S. as well. We all know that. But it's often happening in places where the U.S. doesn't have, a system of laws in place, places like, Cambodia or the Philippines, where, the laws might be different or the enforcement might be different. And there's so much money to be made from what I've heard, and I'd love to hear your take on this. And I hope I don't cry when I say this, but from what I understand, they can make up to almost $500,000 per victim per year. Yeah. That's incredible. And to think of the damage caused to that one individual. And I've seen in my own wife and one of my 3 daughters that were harmed in a similar way by single or 2 or 3 incidents. The horror and the decades it's taken of trauma for them to get through that. I'm amazed, and I don't know how these people get through that. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, that people, they want to feel safe, right? And so people don't want to hear, especially when it comes to children, like people don't want to hear that bad things happen to children. And they particularly don't want to hear that this actually happens a lot in someone's primary family. So like I've actually worked with someone where her father and grandfather were instrumental in her trafficking. And so when there are families that grow up as this is what they know of life, a lot of times survivors don't even realize to their adults that they were actually trafficked because it became the norm for them. This was something that they grew up with. And so when you realize and you think about, like with people who are trafficked, they get isolated a lot, they move around a lot, they don't have a support system. So all they know is what their trafficker is telling them. And a lot of young girls in particular are they are what we call being boyfriend in, where their pimp acts as their boyfriend. And it's like the type of love and trust. We talk about the type of trust that is, even though it's a trauma bond, it's still working for that love, if you will. And so there are so many different layers to it that we really, having conversations like this, really open the eyes for people to look at it from a different perspective, to see like, this is a much bigger problem than we've thought. And so this is where, I love the fact that your company really puts some major money into this to help have awareness and to help people change around and do that. And so people can help it no matter what level they're at. If they want to volunteer, or even just doing things like educating yourself on what to look for to report things like that. Because I think so many times people will look back later and go, something was maybe off with that, but they didn't know who to call or what to do. And there's so many hotlines and options now that the more that we come together as a people and say something, it's kind of like say something, do something is a really important thing to do. And so I love that you're in the wealth management and growth arena, because people can start looking at, the more you grow your personal wealth, the more resources you have to reach out and to donate and to help and support, because, it's going to take a lot of dollars to, combat things like this. So with that in mind and keeping your background in mind, what kind of strategies, that you recommend for people to earn, that whole 12 to 15% in an environment where banks are barely doing 1%?
Yeah, right. So for a long time, I've realized that the wealthiest people in America, the Forbes 400, let's say, almost all invest in commercial real estate. And I didn't know why. I was flipping houses, and I think that's a great thing to do. I had single family rentals. I was building houses, all the things you mentioned in the bio. But I found out later that, I came to the conclusion, at least, that true wealth is having assets that produce cash flow. And commercial real estate, in many cases is just that. It's having assets that produce cash flow. And if you can secure it with low interest rate, fixed rate debt, you can often produce significant cash flow and significant appreciation as well. Of course, there's no guarantees, and we know that from 2008 when almost everything crashed. But commercial real estate is a great, reliable path to that. And one of the reasons is it works on the back of math. Most of us know that a residential house is based on comps, comparable houses in the neighborhood or the area. But commercial real estate is based on math, and it's a formula which is sort of like the inverse of the PE, the price to earnings ratio in the stock market. It's the net operating income divided by the capitalization rate, or the cap rate, which is the rate of return for that asset in that market at that time. And so because of that formula, you can buy a commercial real estate asset and you can force appreciation by doing a lot of different things. There's a lot of levers you can pull. And if we have more time, we could dive into it more, Diane. But basically, because you can force appreciation, you can often create outsized returns in different asset classes like self-storage, in RV parks, apartments, light industrial, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So how has that math changed in commercial real estate, post shutdowns and pandemics, and where a lot of people are working from home now more than ever, and you're seeing a lot of big corporations selling some of their corporate buildings because not as many people are going to work anymore. How's that impact coming into play?
Yeah, so let's just pick one specific asset class. I just wrote a book about a year ago on self-storage. It's called Storing Up Profits. And self-storage came roaring out of the pandemic. You had people who were moving because they could. They left Manhattan or Philadelphia or New York or wherever, and Chicago, I meant. And then they're moving to these rural areas, and they often need a place to store their stuff.
Right.
Other offices are, shuttering a lot of their office space, people working from home, and those offices need a place to store their stuff. Restaurants and bars, unfortunately, closed down. And when they did, they needed a place to store stuff. And so there are now companies. I met with a guy for breakfast today who runs a mattress company. Literally, his warehouse is self-storage. He's renting self-storage units for his company. And so all kinds of things went together to really cause self-storage to boom during COVID. There was no eviction moratoriums because it was just stuff. And so it went very well. RV parks had a 5-fold increase in demand from 2019 to 2020 because of COVID. And it was already an increasing trend in the first place. There's so much more we could say. Mobile home parks, some people wanted to get out of apartments and they wanted to move to mobile home parks. We invest with operators who do a beautiful job upgrading dingy mobile home parks and making them a beautiful place to live. And so those are some of the asset classes that we saw do really well during and since COVID.
Right. Well, and having a pulse on the direction of where people are going and where they're investing their money, gives you kind of a little jump ahead on those kind of things. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that's really true. It's really true.
So true. So what about inflation? I don't think people ever really expected things to be as crazy as they are right now.
No.
And, sometimes people would be like, oh, this is the time to bury your head in the sand. But, people who are, savvy investors go, well, this is actually the time to make some moves.
Right.
So what do you recommend in that area?
Yeah, commercial real estate and other real estate as well has done very well with inflation over the years. Ronald Reagan got elected partly on his platform, 30 years ago, 40 years ago almost,
Right.
of getting, 42 years ago.
How's that possible?
I don't know. But saying that inflation is a thief and a robber, and it's the enemy of all that's good. I'm loosely quoting him.
Right.
But for real estate investors, it's not always true, because if you can get your largest cost fixed for a long time, like say a 30-year mortgage or even a 12-year commercial mortgage, had that fixed for a long time, and then inflation is raising your rents and therefore your revenues and therefore your profits and therefore the value of the asset, then you've got an asset that's actually so-called benefiting from inflation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the reasons people rush in to things like commercial real estate during inflationary times. And we're seeing that right now.
Right, right. I mean, I guess if it's a short-term investment, it makes sense. But anytime, people would have like adjustable, rates and stuff, I would be like, oh God, no, no. It's
Right.
like, I can't even imagine, because that's like just rolling the dice. That's like going to Vegas. Like, you don't know what you're going to get. And so I'm so grateful that I went fixed on my home, and I've seen, the values, California property has just been nuts. So it's just amazing how some of those investments can really pay off and make a shift. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really, really true. And it's like one of the few asset classes that, and again, I'm not saying we're welcoming inflation, but we can't change it anyway. So we might as well make the best of it. And again, investing in rental real estate of all kinds is one way to make good out of inflation.
Right, absolutely. So you also had your own podcast, How to Lose Money. How did that title come about? And tell us a little bit about that run.
Yeah, so about a long time ago, I used to go to these conferences and I would see the speakers up there on the stage, and I don't fault them, I really don't, but they would tell about all their successes. And one conference I went to 7 years straight, finally, I don't know if other people felt that way, but I was kind of tired of it. I was like, well, tell me about your struggles. Tell me about your failures. Somebody went up to the mic and said, hey, excuse me, to this panel of really successful people, tell us about your failures and your struggles. And they were like deer in the headlights. And one guy finally spoke up and he said, my struggle is to get the next generation to understand what we've done and how well they could do if they did followed us. I was like, come on, that's your struggle? And so that was really maddening. But anyway, I thought, if I ever get on stage, if I ever get a microphone, if I ever have a platform, I'm going to talk about failure, mistakes, pain, loss, terrible things on the way to the top, because I think it'll encourage people to know that they're not alone, because everybody on that stage had struggles that they weren't admitting. So what I did is I started a podcast. We interviewed 238 guests over 4 years, and we asked them about their pain and losses and struggles and health crises and relational problems on the way to the top. And we had a wonderful time doing that. We heard a lot of pain, and it was really, really good for our listeners to realize, hey, I'm not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were one of your struggles or pains that really had one of the biggest pivotal shifts for you?
Yeah, I didn't know, Diane. I thought I was a full-time investor once I sold my company in 1997, but I really wasn't. I was really a speculator. I didn't know the difference. Investing is when your principal is generally safe and you've got a chance to make a return. Speculating is when your principal is completely at risk. It's not at all safe, and you've got a chance to make a return. And I didn't know the difference. And so when I invested, my friends and I put over $1 million in a hole in the ground, hoping that oil would come out 10x, and it didn't happen. That was a complete speculation. Or when I bought a 5-acre piece of waterfront property, banking on the laws to change to allow me to subdivide it, that was a speculation. Now, that one actually I made a lot of money from, because I was able to get the law changed, or the zoning changed, actually. But at any rate, that's speculating. And there's nothing wrong with speculating as long as you know you're doing it. But I would say that most people who reliably over generations make a lot of wealth, they do so more by investing than speculating. And so I made a lot of speculations, a lot of mistakes, lost a lot of money. And I now really love investing in reliably cash flowing investments. I stopped swinging for grand slams, started trying to hit singles and doubles, and it's worked out so much better.
Oh, that is so awesome. So as you mentioned it earlier in the bio, you had this brief retirement in your 30s. What was that like, retiring? Because I think for a serial entrepreneur to actually turn off your brain and not necessarily be working on something specific, I think can be a challenge. So what were those years like, and how did they support you into moving to the next thing?
Yeah. So I sold my company, like I said, at 33 years old, 25 years ago. And I thought, I'm going to be the best father and husband and friend. And I became the worst version of myself. I was absolutely miserable. I was a high energy entrepreneur. A year later, I was 34 years old, and I won't say I was twiddling my thumbs because I was busy doing stuff, but it wasn't really that meaningful.
Mm.
And I found myself getting, nervous and anxious and irritable. And I wasn't the best, like I said, version of myself at all. I was created, I think, to be an entrepreneur and to be an investment manager now that I've really matured in my late 50s. And so I think I was a much better version of myself when I put the idea of retirement behind me permanently and decided I wanted to jump back in. And I'm so glad. I'm glad I did it, but I'm so glad to be done with it. That was about a 2.5 year stint.
Right, right. It's funny. I share a lot of times with my clients that there's no such thing as retirement.
Yeah.
There's pivoting and shifting, but you always have to have a passion. And even if it's a volunteer position or something that you're doing, if you don't have a direct impact of what you're going to do, we either grow or we wither, right?
Yeah.
And so we got to have something that inspires us and get us, up in the morning. So it really makes a
Yeah.
difference to have that focus. So, speaking of which, you have 4 children, and so that's a lot to manage. And I'm sure your lovely wife helped you in that area and
Yeah.
took the reins on a lot of that. How has your children become entrepreneurs? What's been their experience? Entrepreneurial households can be very different than the 9 to 5ers.
Yeah. It's funny. I grew up not even knowing a single entrepreneur. And then, I think the culture has changed, though. A whole lot of people are entrepreneurs now that a
Right.
lot of us know. But yeah, my oldest son's 29. He's a real estate investor. He did work as a landscaper, for probably 5 years as a teenager, but he can't even dream of going to work at a company now. And he's doing really well as a real estate entrepreneur, and I'm really proud of him. My next next 2 daughters are in Redding, California. They're doing film and music. And so they're having a lot of fun doing that. So they're both entrepreneurs as well in a different way. And then I have a 17-year-old, and we'll see what's in store for her when she graduates.
Nice, nice. It's interesting because kids sometimes either step in similar things or go completely the opposite,
Yeah,
and you
right.
just never know. It's like, how is it that all of these children came from the same people?
I know,
So
right?
I see that now. I've got 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren, so I know with my daughter having 4, and they all have such different personalities and different pursuits that it can be really interesting to kind of go, where are they going, and where's this coming from, and what attributes do they have? It's really fun.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That is really cool. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's touch a little bit on the HGTV. I mean, that is a fun show. It's a fun transformation that happens in homes. What have you noticed in just seeing, being part of that and the transformations that people do? Because I think people do some things to their home that don't really add value, but maybe it's something that they like to do. If someone had to
Yeah.
do one thing to make their home better, what would that be?
Well, so I was on the show House Hunters one time, and it was a waterfront special at Smith Mountain Lake in Virginia. It came out in June of 2008. It was rerun a bunch of times, and so it was really fun, and it was really cool to be on there. I think the effect of shows like House Hunters, Flip That House, Flip This House, House Flippers, whatever else is out there, I think it caused a whole generation of people to think that they could buy and flip or rent houses in their spare time. And some people actually believe that it could be passive income. And honestly, for almost everybody, it's anything but passive. And so it's very, very hard to do it in their spare time. It is possible. And if everything goes really well, or if you outsource really well, or if you have great crews, or if you have a spouse who can do a lot of the work, sometimes, like she might be an executive and find a house, and then the husband might go work on it, or vice versa. And it falls. And the problem with all that is it's caused a lot of the foreclosure sales on the courthouse steps that I started attending in 2020 or 2000, 22 years ago. those are really crowded now, and it's really hard to get a deal. It's caused the minimum price to go up a lot, which means it's harder for everybody to make a profit.
Right.
To answer your question, the first thing I do would be, this may not be what you expected, but I would, after fixing up the house, I would beautifully stage it. We've had one or two houses over the years when I used to flip houses that we could never sell. We staged them with rental furniture, and within a month we had a contract.
Yes, I absolutely agree. When I first retired from law enforcement, I did a lot of organizing for people and decluttering their space and really seeing how that really affects just all life and performance. And when, the confused mind says no, so you walk into a
Right.
colored space, they don't see themselves in that space. So providing a beautiful space, people step into that dream, if you will, and they're more attracted to it. So I absolutely get that.
Right.
So.
Yep. It's
Awesome.
true.
So good. Well, Paul, I know that people are going to want to stay in contact with you. How can they best do that?
Yeah, they can reach out to us at our website. It's wellingscapital.com. That's WELLINGS, wellingscapital.com. I'll tell you, I spent years banging my head against the wall, like I said earlier, trying to figure out how to get involved in commercial real estate. And so I've created an e-course, an audio book, and an ebook, all which are in an introduction to commercial real estate. You can get that at wellingscapital.com/resources.
Wonderful. I love that. And as you know, our theme for this season are people creating freedom in their life. So in what way are you creating freedom in your life today?
Well, I can tell you that we're trying to help create freedom for a lot of survivors of human trafficking. So in the last 11 months, we've raised over $340,000 from our investors, friends, partners, and ourselves to fight human trafficking and rescue its victims. As far as how I'm creating freedom, gosh, for myself, I used to view Saturdays and Sundays as a day to get more work done. I thought, hey, the phone's going to stop ringing, the emails will slow down, I'm going to get a lot more work done. And I really regret those years and those decades that I lost those weekends away from, honestly being distracted from my kids, even though they're all doing really well, and being distracted. And I think my health suffered, my time suffered, and I am now creating freedom by really taking my weekends and vacations seriously.
So smart. This is a really important lesson for people to listen to because, we got to restore ourselves, right? I mean, you can do the big push, but there's a reason why there's a day of rest, right?
Yes,
that it's meant
right.
to be there for us to restore ourselves so that we can show up as our best self. So, yeah. Paul, I want to thank you so much for your wisdom and your time and really sharing these really important guidelines for people to have.
Diane, it's been such an honor to be here, and I really appreciate it.
You got it. And to our listeners out there, for you, if you're looking to step into, investing and not speculating, then please look into Paul's company. Please share this. We have such opportunities to be able to create our own destiny and our own wealth in ways where we're not having to rely on other people. And you can really just start today. If you've not started today, start educating yourself in that way. So until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now. Bye-bye.